Meera Khanum arrived in Abu Dhabi chasing a dream, but within months, her name would be whispered in horror across the desert. Behind the golden gates of Sheikh Rafiq Al Nadir's palace, power, desire, and secrecy collided, sealing her fate forever. When Layla Al Nadir discovered the forbidden secret growing inside her husband's servant, the mansion turned into a prison. And as Dr. Omar Bashir and Detective Kareem Dolat became tangled in the web of lies, one truth stood above all. A pregnant Indian maid had dared to defy a sheikh, and for that, she paid with her life. The heat of Abu Dhabi shimmered across the desert horizon as Meera Khanum stepped off the transport van that had carried her from the airport to the Grand Al Nadir estate. She had traveled thousands of miles from her small village in Kerala, India, carrying nothing more than a suitcase, a few clothes, and a heart full of hope. Like many others before her, Meera dreamed of a better life. The recruitment agency had promised a generous salary, free accommodation, and respectful employers. She imagined sending money back home to repair her parents' crumbling house, to pay for her younger sister's school fees, and maybe even save enough to open a small tailoring shop one day. The first sight of the Sheikh's mansion left her speechless. It wasn't a house, it was a palace rising from the sand. Walls of cream marble, golden railings, and wide glass windows that sparkled like mirrors. The compound had guards at the entrance and cameras at every corner. As she stepped through the massive gates, she felt both awe and nervousness. Inside, maids in uniform hurried across the hallways, while the scent of perfume and polished wood filled the air. The air conditioning cooled her skin, but the weight of luxury felt strange to her. Her supervisor led her to the servants' quarters, a small section tucked behind the villa, away from the main living areas. Her room was shared with another maid, Anjali Dev, who had been working there for 2 years. Anjali warned her in hushed tones that the Sheikh's house looked beautiful on the outside, but was full of secrets. Meera didn't understand what she meant at first. To her, everything seemed perfect. The family appeared polite. Meals were plentiful, and her duties simple enough: cleaning, laundry, and assisting with kitchen work. Over the following weeks, Meera began to notice the quiet tension that filled the mansion. The Sheikh, Rafiq Al Nadir, was rarely home during the day, but every evening his arrival changed the atmosphere. The guards stood straighter, the staff moved faster, and everyone avoided eye contact. His wife, Layla Al Nadir, was a beautiful woman draped in expensive clothes but rarely smiled. She often sat silently in the corner of the grand living room, eyes empty, like a prisoner in her own palace. Meera sometimes wondered if Layla was unwell, but it wasn't her place to ask. As time passed, Meera worked tirelessly from dawn till night, earning the quiet trust of her employers. The Sheikh began to notice her dedication and her innocence. He started giving her small gestures of approval, a soft word of praise, a few extra dirhams for her family, or leftover perfumes and clothes. Meera took them gratefully, unaware of the hidden intentions behind his kindness. To her, he was simply a generous employer. But soon she began to sense a shift. His gaze lingered too long, and his footsteps often echoed outside her room late at night. One evening, when everyone had gone to sleep, she heard her door creak open. She froze, pretending to be asleep, but she could feel the weight of someone standing near her bed. When she opened her eyes in the morning, the door was slightly ajar. From that night onward, she kept a chair pressed against the handle before going to sleep. Despite her growing unease, Meera stayed quiet. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her family depended on her. She told herself she was imagining things, that maybe she was overthinking. But deep down, a voice warned her that something wasn't right. Then came the night when the Sheikh called her to his private quarters, saying he needed help with his clothes. The room smelled of rich cologne and smoke. That was the night everything changed. The night when fear became a permanent part of Meera's life in Abu Dhabi. From that moment, the dream she had built for her family began to crumble. Behind the golden walls of wealth and power, she had unknowingly stepped into a trap that would seal her fate forever. Meera Khanum woke up each morning in a haze of fear and confusion. Days at the Al Nadir villa now passed like shadows. Every moment felt heavy with an unspoken threat. She could still hear the echo of that night in the Sheikh's private quarters, the night that left her numb and trembling. The next morning, she tried to convince herself that it was over, that she could forget what had happened and focus on her work. But the Sheikh's presence became constant. He found excuses to summon her, to have her near, and to remind her of the power he held over her life. Weeks later, Meera began to feel weak and nauseous. Her hands shook when she cleaned, and food made her sick. At first, she blamed the stress, the heat, the exhaustion. But when she missed her monthly cycle, dread crept in. Alone in the servants' bathroom, she took a test one of the other maids had smuggled from a pharmacy. The 2 faint lines that appeared changed everything. She sat on the cold tile floor, clutching the test to her chest, realizing the impossible truth. She was pregnant with Sheikh Rafiq al-Nadir's child. Panic replaced fear. She couldn't tell anyone, not even Anjali. The Sheikh's reputation was untouchable, and his wrath was something she couldn't imagine surviving. She began wearing loose clothes to hide her body, hoping to leave quietly before anyone noticed. She started planning her escape, saving small amounts from her salary, hiding them in a folded towel at the back of her drawer. But the plan fell apart faster than she imagined. It was Layla al-Nadir, the Sheikh's wife, who first noticed the subtle changes. Meera's tired eyes, the way she walked, the way she tried to cover her stomach. Suspicion turned to certainty after Layla overheard 2 maids whispering in the laundry room. Within hours, Meera was dragged before the furious woman. The air in the mansion turned icy. Though Layla said nothing to her directly, her silence was far more terrifying than anger. That night, Meera's room was locked from the outside. Her passport, ID, and phone were taken away. She was a prisoner now, trapped in the very house she had once admired. Days turned into weeks, and the Sheikh stopped pretending. He came to her room unannounced, his face unreadable. He told her that this pregnancy could never exist, that she must end it before it destroyed everything. But Meera refused. Her tears fell silently as she shook her head. The life growing inside her was all she had left, the one piece of innocence in her world of control and cruelty. Her refusal made the Sheikh furious. From that day, he stopped speaking to her directly and left everything to his private physician, Dr. Omar Bashir. Dr. Bashir arrived at the mansion under the pretense of a routine checkup. He told Meera the Sheikh had arranged for a procedure, that it was in her best interest to comply. He handed her tablets that would make things easier, but she refused to take them. Each refusal came with consequences. Her meals were reduced, her movements restricted, and her belongings searched. The guards outside her door acted like they were protecting her, but she knew they were watching. Anjali noticed Meera's absence and began asking questions. She was told that Meera had been transferred to another household. But late one night, she saw Dr. Bashir leaving the villa with a bag of medical equipment and stains of blood on his gloves. Something inside her told her that Meera was in danger. Inside her locked room, Meera sat on her narrow bed, clutching her belly and whispering prayers no one would ever hear. She hoped that someone, anyone added, would find out the truth before it was too late. But in the grand halls of the al-Nadir estate, silence was stronger than justice. And in the eyes of those who lived there, Meera was not a person anymore, just a problem that needed to disappear. The morning Meera vanished, the al-Nadir villa was unusually quiet. The servants moved with forced calm, their eyes lowered, their hands trembling as they worked. Rumors began spreading even before breakfast was served. Some whispered that Meera had been sent back to India overnight. Others said she had fallen ill and was being treated elsewhere. But none of it felt true. Her belongings were still in the room she shared with Anjali Dev. The clothes folded neatly, her old mobile phone under the pillow, and the towel she always carried missing from the drawer. The towel was where she hid her savings. Anjali knew something terrible had happened. She had seen Meera 2 nights before, pale and weak, barely able to stand. When Anjali tried to talk to her, the door was slammed shut by one of the guards. Since then, no one had seen or heard her voice again. The Sheikh's wife, Layla, avoided eye contact with the staff, walking through the halls like a ghost. Her silence spoke louder than any words. Later that day, a new maid arrived to replace Meera. She was told that the previous worker had run away to avoid punishment. But how could Meera run when her passport was locked in the Sheikh's office? When Anjali asked about her friend, she was warned by the supervisor never to mention her name again. It was clear that everyone had been ordered to stay quiet. Still, Anjali couldn't ignore the feeling that Meera was somewhere close, somewhere inside those walls, calling out for help that would never come. 3 days after Meera's disappearance, 2 workers from the maintenance team were seen digging behind the villa near the edge of the property. When Anjali asked what they were doing, they said they were repairing pipes. Yet no one had reported a leak. That same night, the security cameras in the area were switched off and the footage for those hours was deleted from the system. The next morning, a faint smell of chemicals hung in the air, drifting from the back garden where the sand looked freshly turned. Anjali's heart raced with fear. She wanted to report it to the authorities, but she was terrified of what the sheikh could do. Everyone in the villa knew his power stretched far beyond those walls. He had connections with the police, politicians, even embassy officials. People who crossed him didn't just lose their jobs, they disappeared. But Meera was more than just a colleague to her. She was a friend, a sister from the same soil, carrying dreams they both shared. Anjali couldn't stay silent anymore. Using a hidden phone she had purchased months earlier, Anjali contacted the Indian embassy and reported Meera missing. The official she spoke to sounded skeptical at first, dismissing it as a case of a runaway worker. It wasn't uncommon for maids to flee from abusive employers, they said. But Anjali insisted that Meera couldn't have escaped. She had no documents, no money, and she was pregnant. After several calls and emails, an embassy officer finally agreed to look into the case quietly. Meanwhile, inside the villa, tension began to rise. The sheikh appeared calm in public, but his temper behind closed doors was explosive. He ordered every trace of Meera's existence erased. Her employment record, her photos, even her messages. He bribed agency officials to say she had voluntarily returned to India. But the truth had already started slipping through the cracks. 2 weeks later, one of the security guards who had been on duty the night Meera vanished abruptly quit and left the country. Before leaving, he sent an anonymous message to the embassy. She never left Abu Dhabi. That single line reopened the case that was about to be buried. By then, the whispers inside the mansion had turned into fear. Staff members avoided the garden. Some claimed to have seen strange stains on the sand at dawn. Others swore they heard crying in the empty hallways. Everyone knew something unspeakable had happened, but no one dared to say it out loud. Meera's presence still haunted the villa, even in her absence, as if her spirit refused to rest until someone found the truth buried beneath the desert. 3 weeks after Meera's disappearance, a construction crew working near the desert outskirts of Abu Dhabi came across something strange. While digging for a pipeline installation along a private road owned by Al Nadir Holdings, one of the workers hit something soft beneath the sand. At first they thought it was an animal carcass, but when the wind shifted, a faint and unmistakable odor of decay filled the air. The site manager called the authorities, and within hours police surrounded the area. What they unearthed sent shockwaves through everyone present. A young woman's body wrapped in a torn bedsheet, buried barely 3 feet below the surface. The discovery made local headlines for a day, described vaguely as the unidentified body of an Asian domestic worker. But when the embassy requested to view the remains, the truth began to unfold. The gold anklet around her leg, the birthmark on her shoulder, and a small ring she never took off confirmed it beyond doubt. It was Meera Cannon. Her body told the story her lips never could. Bruises marked her arms and back, her ribs showed signs of fractures, and her skull had been struck with great force. Most haunting of all, the autopsy revealed she was 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. The police initially treated it as a low-profile case, but the Indian embassy demanded answers. That's when Detective Karim Dawlat, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for following his instincts, was assigned to lead the inquiry. From the beginning, Karim sensed something deeply wrong. The area where Meera was found wasn't random. It was close to a restricted property linked directly to Sheikh Rafik Al Nadir's company. The timing, the secrecy, and the location all hinted at a cover-up. Inside the Sheikh's estate, panic began to stir. The news reached the household staff before the Sheikh did. Anjali Dev, who had been waiting desperately for any sign of Meera, broke down in tears when she saw the headline online. She went to the embassy the next morning and told them everything she knew. The locked room, the missing passport, the blood-stained gloves she had seen on Dr. Omar Bashir, and the night the security cameras went dark. Her testimony became the first solid lead in the case. When Detective Karim tried to access the villa's surveillance footage, he discovered that the recordings for 2 crucial nights had been erased. The security company in charge of the system reported that they were instructed by the estate's owner to delete data for privacy reasons. That order came directly from the Sheikh's office. As investigators began to gather fragments of evidence, they also found the medical records signed by Dr. Omar Bashir, documents that claimed Meera had been treated for dehydration and severe emotional distress. Those papers were dated the same week she disappeared. The forensics team compared the sedatives found in Meera's blood with those kept in the Sheikh's private clinic. They matched exactly. Despite the growing pile of evidence, the investigation met obstacles at every turn. Warrants were delayed, files were misplaced, and certain officers were transferred without explanation. The Sheikh's influence was far-reaching, and he used every resource to keep the case from gaining traction. But Detective Karim refused to back down. He began documenting every lead in secret, storing copies of reports in his own home, fearing that the truth would be buried just like Meera. Meanwhile, Meera's story began spreading beyond Abu Dhabi. Indian news channels picked up the case, calling it a modern tragedy of power and exploitation. Protests erupted outside the embassy, demanding justice for Meera and her unborn child. Under international scrutiny, the local authorities could no longer ignore the crime. The Sheikh's public image began to crack. His business partners distanced themselves, and Layla Al-Nadir vanished from public appearances altogether. Rumors circulated that she had left the country, unable to bear the weight of what had happened inside her own home. By the end of that month, the investigators had gathered enough evidence to name suspects, but no arrests were made. It was clear the case was more than a murder. It was a web of money, reputation, and silence woven by one of the most powerful men in the Emirates. Yet beneath that silence, the truth was rising piece by piece, and Meera's name was no longer forgotten. She had become the whisper that refused to die in the City of Gold. Detective Karim Dalat knew he was walking on dangerous ground. Each new piece of evidence he uncovered seemed to disappear before he could file it. Witnesses were suddenly deported, statements rewritten, and documents marked confidential by senior officials. It was obvious the Sheikh's influence reached far beyond the walls of his mansion. Still, Karim pressed forward, keeping copies of everything he found. What had begun as a simple investigation into a maid's disappearance was now unraveling into a scandal that could shake the foundations of power in Abu Dhabi. He focused on tracing the people closest to the Sheikh. Dr. Omar Bashir, the family's private physician, was the first link. Karim discovered that just days before Meera's disappearance, a large payment had been transferred to Bashir's offshore account. It was disguised as consultancy fees. When confronted, the doctor refused to speak, claiming he had signed a confidentiality agreement. 2 days later, he abruptly resigned and fled the country, leaving behind his clinic and belongings. But one of his assistants came forward, revealing that Bashir had been asked to perform a termination procedure on a woman in the Sheikh's villa who was 6 months pregnant. He had refused, saying it was too risky, but the Sheikh insisted that the matter be resolved quietly. Meanwhile, Layla Al-Nadir had vanished from Abu Dhabi entirely. Karim found records showing that she boarded a private flight to London 3 weeks after Meera's body was discovered. For months, no one knew her whereabouts, until a British journalist tracked her down living under a different name. It was there that Layla finally broke her silence. In an exclusive interview, she confessed that she had known about Meera's pregnancy. She said her husband had become enraged when Meera refused to abort the child. One evening, after an argument, Layla claimed she heard screams from Meera's locked room. The next morning, the Sheikh told her that Meera had been handled and would never cause problems again. She was forbidden to ask questions. The statement went public, and within hours, the story became global news. Under intense international pressure, the Abu Dhabi authorities were forced to reopen the case. The Sheikh's home was searched for the first time. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement, investigators found a collection of personal items belonging to Meera: her clothes, a set of letters she had written to her family, and a notebook containing the final entry dated just 2 days before she vanished. In shaky handwriting, she had written that she feared for her life, that they wanted to take her baby, and that she prayed to leave the world only if her child could be safe. The evidence was undeniable, but the trial that followed was more spectacle than justice. The Sheikh appeared calm in court, dressed impeccably, surrounded by lawyers. His defense argued that Meera had died in a medical accident and that the Sheikh had no involvement. Dr. Bashir, testifying remotely from another country, claimed he had been acting under orders to help her but that complications had occurred. Despite the overwhelming suspicion, the Sheikh received only a minimal sentence for negligence resulting in death. The ruling caused outrage around the world. People called it an insult to the truth. Detective Karim submitted his resignation soon after the verdict. He had done everything he could, but power had once again silenced justice. Still, the story didn't die. Activists and journalists continued to speak Meera's name. Her photograph, the one taken on her first day in Abu Dhabi, smiling shyly in front of the marble gates, became a symbol across South Asia and the Middle East. She represented the thousands of women who left their homes in search of hope, only to be trapped in the shadows of luxury. Months later, the Sheikh's empire began to crumble. Business partners withdrew support and his assets were quietly frozen. Layla's confession had sparked investigations into his other dealings, uncovering years of hidden abuse and exploitation. Though he lived freely, his power was gone. In the quiet corners of Kerala, Meera's parents built a small shrine beside their home, using the money donated by strangers who had heard her story. Her name was carved into the stone, along with the words she had once written to her sister before leaving India. Even in foreign lands, I will make us proud. She never returned alive, but her story crossed borders, igniting a conversation that could no longer be silenced. And so, Meera Kanan, the maid who refused to give up her unborn child, became larger than the sheikh who tried to erase her. Her truth lived on, whispered in the wind over the deserts of Abu Dhabi, carried in the hearts of millions who promised she would never be forgotten.